Okay, so this source we're looking at today makes a really bold and you could say controversial argument. It asks a big question. How does a small nation like Israel have so much influence over a superpower like the United States? Now, our job here isn't to say if this is right or wrong, but to just break down the source's answer to that question, piece by piece.
So right from the get-go, the source sets up its entire argument around what it calls a central puzzle in American foreign policy, something it sees as a fundamental paradox.
And that brings us to the big question the whole thing is built on. The source argues that if you really want to understand how global power works, you first have to figure out why the US seems to play by a completely different set of rules when it comes to Israel.
And to really hammer this point home, the source gives us this pretty stark comparison. It points out that, on one hand, the US pulled its support from the war in Yemen because of civilian deaths, but on the other hand, it hasn't called the situation in Gaza a genocide. The US threatens China over Taiwan, but it's quiet about the occupation of the West Bank. For the source, this is the contradiction that needs an explanation.
Okay, so if that's the puzzle, what's the source's solution? How does it explain this so-called special treatment? Well, it argues the answer isn't just a simple alliance. It's a highly strategic and deeply systematic machine of influence.
The answer, according to this source, boils down to two words: lobby diplomacy. It claims this powerful and deeply embedded strategy is the real key to understanding everything else.
So what exactly is lobby diplomacy? Well, the source defines it really broadly. It's not just about shaking hands with politicians in Washington. No, it's way bigger than that. The argument is that it's a full-on strategy to weave pro-Israel influence into the very fabric of American life, from college campuses all the way to the media you consume every day.
So, the source then breaks this whole influence machine down into key areas. Let's start with the first two, which are all about shaping American minds and controlling the media.
And it's laid out as this four-stage process, which the source argues is a kind of pipeline. It all starts in childhood, gets reinforced in school, then gets blasted out to the world through Hollywood, and finally it's locked in by the daily news you watch. Right, so stage one, childhood. The argument here is that popular cartoons, and they point to examples like Superbook and Prince of Egypt, are used to plant the seeds of a pro-Israel sentiment from a really young age, creating a sort of baseline sympathy. Okay, so after cartoons, the source claims this influence machine follows kids right into the classroom. It alleges that there's an Israeli-funded organization with a very specific goal to get into American textbooks and literally reshape how kids learn about history.
And the source gets really specific here, listing alleged changes to textbooks, things like completely deleting any mention of Palestine or the West Bank, or swapping out the word Palestine for Judah, and even rewriting the history of how the West Bank was captured back in 1967. Then we move up to higher education, and the source throws out this number, 20%. That's the percentage of professors at top American universities who are Jewish. And the argument here isn't just about the number itself, but that this level of representation helps make sure a pro-Israel viewpoint stays strong and well-defended within the highest levels of academia.
And of course, after academia, you have Hollywood, which the source calls a massive pillar of this influence machine. It points to specific movies, arguing they consistently push a few key narratives: sympathy for Israel, the glorification of its military power, and the historical persecution of the Jewish people. And to back this up, the source points to another statistic: 59%. That's the alleged percentage of Hollywood writers and directors who are Jewish. The source claims this is why you see those pro-Israel narratives on screen, and how that message gets beamed all over the world to any country that watches Hollywood movies. And the fourth and final pillar in this media section, well, it's the news itself. The source cites reports from other places to claim there's a huge amount of editorial control happening behind the scenes. It even alleges, for example, that CNN's recent war coverage had to be directly approved by the Israeli military before it could ever air. So, we've covered media and culture, but the source argues this machine doesn't stop there. It goes right into the heart of American religion and, you guessed it, politics, where all that influence can be turned into actual policy. First up, religion. The source shows how some American Christian leaders frame political support for Israel as, well, not political at all. It's presented as a religious duty, a biblical command for their followers. It becomes a Bible issue. Then you've got direct political power. To show just how much influence these pro-Israel lobbies allegedly have, the source highlights this absolutely wild quote from an Israeli NGO chief who boasted, "I could give a napkin to 70 senators in 24 hours and they would sign it."
But then the source makes what is probably its most explosive claim of all. It talks about an incident of alleged blackmail at the very top, asserting that the Israeli Prime Minister used secret recordings from the Monica Lewinsky affair to pressure President Clinton into releasing a spy.
Okay, now this is where the source makes a really sharp turn. It takes this whole deep dive on Israel's strategy and uses it as a mirror to look at another country entirely, India.
And this is the core of that comparison. On one side, you have what the source calls the Zionist movement, a powerful, unifying, nation-first ideology. And on the other side, it describes what it calls the Indian mindset, which it claims is held back by a national inferiority complex, where foreign cultures get all the glory and its own history gets pushed aside.
And that brings us to the source's final takeaway. You see, this isn't just an analysis. It's meant to be a direct call to action, based on everything we've just seen.
The big lesson here, according to the source, is that for India to get stronger and resist this kind of foreign influence, it needs to learn from the Israeli model. It calls for a big nationalist movement, a nation before religion mindset, and this core idea that you just can't have individual success without national success. So, in the end, the source's whole argument boils down to this. A unified, strategic national identity is the secret sauce for global power. But its analysis leaves us with a much bigger question to chew on, doesn't it? In a world that's so incredibly diverse, with so many different peoples and cultures, what is it that really forges national unity?